Again. Hi everybody. Today we're going to talk about venting, which can be really negative thoughts, to raving, which is a more positive outcome. And that's going to be the topic about emotion and all that field. So let's go for Alec. What's your thought about that?
Thanks, Julien. Going back to the era of punk, there was a song that anger was an energy, and there is a truth to it. If we are frustrated by something, what the English would say, it's got our gander up, and you want to stand on a soapbox and rant on a corner because you feel so passionate about a subject. The empowered way of dealing with that is to actually find a positive energy in it, to motivate oneself to tackle whatever thing it is. You know, we've talked frequently on the Wi-Fi chat about our why, what our passion is. So there is this kind of belief that ranting is negative, and it can go that way for sure, but it also shows us where our passions lie. And for me, finding that sweet spot between an anger and frustration that really motivates me and drives me to want to see change on anything up to a global level is what puts us into that place of raving about something, how good it is, how beneficial, how powerful, and gives energy to the message that we want to share with people.
I think ranting itself can have really beneficial effects on us, because how often do we feel angry, but we have learned we can't show anger? So we all internalize it. We swallow our so-called negative emotions down, and they're just sitting there and they're building up. And if you ever had a situation where suddenly somebody exploded and you don't know why, because the reaction was far over the top over that what just happened, that's probably why. They probably had their emotions stuck up for weeks and months, and then something little happens. The saying, the one drop who brought the barrel to overflow, that's exactly what happens. So sometimes I think it's really good if you have somebody and you can go home, maybe to your partner, to your friend, whoever it is, and actually be able to rant even for 5 minutes about the day, just to let the emotions out and address them, and they're done and dusted. What you said, Alec, is really interesting. If we overdo it and we only rant, people will see us eventually as a negative Nelly, right? And how can we, and the question then is, how can we change then the ranting into action energy, where we start to rave, where we actually use this energy for something positive, for example, looking for solutions rather than just ranting around the problem?
Yeah, picking up on that, Gabby, I think, first of all, anger is not a negative emotion. So like you say, it's good, and sometimes we need to rant. We need to get it off our chest, and often we'll feel that we're unburdened by doing that. But I think as a communication technique, then probably it's not going to get us the results often that perhaps we want. So I think then we have to look at the similarities sometimes that we have between different emotions that we class as negative and positive. So anger is very, very similar to the emotion like enthusiasm. But enthusiasm is taking it to a more positive level rather than just looking at the negatives. So I think it's just trying to make those subtle switches sometimes to package it slightly differently, and we can very easily tweak that and become enthusiastic and motivated and talk about it in a different way if we're trying to actually get a message across, or we're trying to teach people or inform people. I think if we're just standing there shouting and ranting, it's a monologue. It's kind of, I think a lot that's going to get lost on a lot of people. And also because people do tend to look towards the negative, if we're just standing there, ranting and ranting and ranting, I think a lot of people don't like that, kind of might feel there's a little bit of conflict there. So they might just kind of pull away, because anger is a motivation that is an away from emotion. So people tend to draw back from that. So we want to find an emotion that's going to draw people towards us rather than away from us, I think.
Yeah, that's brilliant what you said, because anger, in the end of the day, we get angry when a need of ours isn't met. So instead of keeping shouting and being seen as aggressive about the anger you have, it's starting to rave about the need we have if we want to change it around and bring this enthusiasm in, because there is no bad or negative and good emotions. I don't like to class them. Emotions are all human. We all have them, and we can address them. There's no, and if there is a so-called negative emotions, it's something our brain is telling us something isn't right here. So let's figure out what's not right. And in the case of anger, it's a need which isn't met.
I'm about to go on a rant about anger and how it is viewed in our society, right? And I'm just agreeing with everything everybody said so far about anger and the difference between ranting and raving. So anger, like there's multiple types of anger, right? Like anger isn't just one thing. It comes from different things. And you know that I'm not going to let a conversation go away without saying grief and anger are simultaneous. Like you cannot be in grief and not experience, like anger is one of the symptoms of grief, basically. So, but on anger itself, like we have passive anger, which is what Gabby was just saying, people who suppress and they don't express their anger, right? Then you have aggressive anger, which is, we don't want that, because that's when people act on their anger, whether verbally or with their actions and violence and all of that, which we definitely don't want. And then you have what we're going to call assertive anger, which is what raving is, right? So you can have a rant, which what Melanie was saying, you're just spewing at the mouth, right? You're letting it out, which is great, but there's really it's not going anywhere. It's complaining at an overall level, right? Like you're just bitching and moaning. I'm just going to say it like that. When we shift it and we turn it into an empowerment and use our anger in a positive way and call it assertive anger, it's more problem and solution focused, right? It's like, I'm really annoyed or frustrated about this specific thing. And instead of taking a victim mentality around it and bitching and moaning around it, I'm going to flip it and I'm going to rave about it and come up with ways that we can solve it so that I don't have to continue feeling angry about it. So that's my view on it. Anger, I don't hide from my anger. I'm in my anger. When I'm angry, everybody knows it, and I'm not afraid of it, and I'm not ashamed of it, because it's an indicator, right? I use it as a roadmap to finding what is going on for me that I'm feeling this way. And it's usually, for me personally, leads back to some frustration of some type or some injustice that I'm feeling, or a conflict in my own values. So anger, I think if we can learn how to harness it and we can understand the concept, the concept like Viktor Frankl said about how, between stimulus, what's pissing us off, and how we're choosing to respond to it in that space is where it's at. Like that's where the gold is. And how do I want to go through this? But assertive anger and raving and finding a way to fix whatever it is that's causing me to feel this way is the way of the future. And I think that we should support that and encourage it.
Actually, you and Gabby have both mentioned something that I know is a bit of a passion of Melanie's anyway, which is the non-violent forms of communication. You identify something, which in this case is an anger, and identify that there's a need. We make an open communication with a kind of I statement. I am feeling this emotion about that thing. What I would like to see, and what I'm hoping to enroll your helping, is a solution which I can see being X thing. And at the very worst, you get a response in the conversation that is, I can't do that, but I can do this. And then you've got a foundation, and you might actually get a complete reversal, and the person say, or the situation become, actually, we didn't realize that. And if we'd have known that there was this way of doing it, that's something that we can all get behind. So you are, go on.
I'm sorry. And Brett, I'm aware you haven't gone yet, but I'm just going to follow this because it's connected. it's language too, right? How important is language in the way that we frame this, right? Because someone, you all know me, and anybody who meets me, if I'm on a topic that I'm on a topic about, some people might say, oh, she's pissed, right? Like she's pissed. Switch the language, take the positive spin, flip the dynamic to assertive anger and say, I'm not pissed, I'm really passionate about it though, and want to find a way to make it better. So I have a specific example. I'm all things grief, right? We know this. Grief is my thing. So there is a specific area around grief that really, really angers me. It frustrates me. It pisses me off. And it's the concept of, when it comes to the work world, right? The workforce, that someone who's grieving or has lost a parent or somebody, they only get 3 days from work. 3 days off from work. Complete bullshit. Excuse the rant, but it's complete BS that a human being can only get 3 days to grieve the loss of someone who is really important to them. So it's sort of like a long-term passion project of mine to want to figure out who I need to team up with, who I need to talk to, what needs to happen in order to reach the higher ups that make these decisions, making that a shift in the corporate workforce to have at least a week. You should at least have the full week off if somebody passes, right? And not worry, I only get 3 days. I have to use the rest of my time off, my vacation time, to grieve the loss of someone who I love. So that's the shift, right? I could rant and get on a soapbox about what complete bullshit it is to only get 3 days off, or I could use my energy in a positive, assertive way to find an answer to that, so that human beings who spend their days at work can at least get 5 days from their employers, to grieve the loss of someone who meant the world to them. So that's the shift, and a real life example for me.
Yeah, I think what I got from that, Eric, is that when we're in that kind of like that more negative energy, so we're angry and we're just spewing, we're using up so much of our own energy. It's very energy intense. It's almost like it's that jet fuel that gets us going and gets us motivated, but we can't sustain that. I think then we need to the structure needs to come in. What is the message I actually want to get across? Some context. So I think the anger is brilliant because it's the thing that gets us going. But it's that short-term kind of burst. I think if we stay in that kind of mode, then we're going to kind of fizzle out and drop in the ocean. So I think we need to learn, to turn that around, and then start bringing it down and actually putting some context and some structure to actually get our message across. And that's where, as you said, the communication comes in as well.
It's like fuel. It's used as fuel. Anger used properly and in an assertive, positive way is just fuel for your passion, right? It's fuel for the passion to get results, to shift whatever it is that caused the anger in the first place. That's the way that I look at it, in a positive way.
Yeah, I've experienced some good anger, and usually I'll take a breath, and then I'll start out like, how do I use this? And it's like, so I don't understand. And it's usually how I start out, like, I don't understand. I'm looking for XYZ outcome. And how is it that I can get the XYZ outcome with your support? What is it that I need from you that can actually get this? And if I find a way of getting there, it's really nice, because all of a sudden something happens and I just go somewhere and it just starts, I don't even know what I'm saying, and it just starts coming out. But it tends to be more of opening up and showing the way of what's needed. And it's the rant, right? It shifts to the rave, where it's on a positive note, but I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly what I was gonna say or what I just got done saying. But then the feedback will be, wow, that's pretty good. I can help you with that. Yeah, I could do something with that. And that piece, when I do that, I'm hoping that I'm modeling for somebody else how to take that energy, that negative, right, and kind of shift it into a positive. Just taking for me, it's the breath, and like, I don't understand. Like, where did I go wrong? Was it, you know what I mean? Like, I must have gone wrong. And I try to look at it in that way. And then I start offering back and looking for and trying to put it in a positive way so that the outcome is in the positive.
I like all the connections between what we just said, anger being a compass. If you think about it, anger always has a secondary emotion, and they can be really, really different. And all of you actually tapped into that. So anger can come out because we're frustrated. Anger can come out because we feel an injustice, like Erika just described, right? Anger can have, maybe we crave connection with somebody and somebody isn't aware of it, and we get angry at their behavior and they don't even know we're having a need for better connection. And that brings us back to good communication, as Melanie says, right? If we are not able to express why we feel what we feel, we will never get the results we're looking for, because people cannot read our minds and they cannot really read. They know there's something going on. They can see our emotions in our body language. They can hear it in our tone of voice, but they don't even know where it's coming from. And they're just frustrated at themselves then, and then they get angry, and the next thing you have a fight on your hand. So being able, and we're coming back to self-awareness, being able to actually pinpoint down what secondary emotion, what need is behind our anger, that's when we can go into the raving. That's when we can say, hold on, I'm angry. Hold on, I'm missing connection. And then you can start in the positive. I miss you. We haven't done anything for a long time. Can we maybe, can you help me out here? Can we, and as Alex said, it goes then into communication skills. But that's where the positive part comes from, the ranting into the raving, for me at least.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, there are multitudes of layers of emotion, right? That anger is really, it's a bodyguard. It's definitely a bodyguard for sadness, for sure. So somebody who's really sad, which is why I connected it to grief, anger protects that person from being vulnerable to that sadness. So it might lead with anger, but underlying it's sadness. I mean, we have shame, anxiety, powerlessness, isolation, like you said, lack of connection. There's a multitude of things that anger. So I'm more curious to know why we've gotten to this place where anger has such it's not welcomed. Like, it's just not welcomed. We don't talk about it. We don't allow it to exist. We're engaged in this positivity bypass train that we're on, where we just say, I'm feeling really angry, but I'm going to write in my gratitude journal about everything I'm grateful for. Well, you know what? That's fantastic, but your anger is still going to be there. Why don't you feel grateful that you're angry? Because then maybe you can figure out what's really going on for you and get to the root of the problem. So I'm all about anger. I think it's fine. And I want it to be understood that by no means do I think that ranting should definitely be allowed. Like, people, like Gabby said earlier, we need to express that in quick little bursts, right? Like an anger burst. Like, I'm ranting to express it, because if I don't, I'm going to suppress it and it's just going to do more damage. So I'm going to suppress it. The thing that I think needs to happen is that it's limited, right? Like, you can rant to get it out, but long-term ranting is just complaining. So let it out. Let your clients let it out, right? Until then, and you agree to, I'm going to let you rant for 5 minutes. You're going to get it all out. And then we're going to shift and we're going to find what we can do about this now. So ranting has to exist, but the end game should be, how can I switch this into something positive to find a solution?
Yeah, and I'm gonna add that it's also about authenticity and not stepping in the hypocrisy zone, kind of, because if we cannot say stuff out loud, that's probably also means that we are not in the right relationship. And because we don't feel safe to express it, and that's either it's a toxic relationship, like in a negative way or in a positive way. Like I call like that toxic positivity, you know, when you cannot express anything negative, you know, like, well, that's not the the reality that we all experience. Everything is not all white or black. So I think, yeah, it's also important. Like, and sometimes people, as Alex said, like they're just not aware of our boundaries. So we have to express it out loud sometime, and then we can move on. And that's how to strengthen connection, I think.
It's really, sorry, Alec, go ahead.
I was just going to say that on your point of not being encouraged to express anger, I think it goes hand in hand with conformity and not expressing creativity. If you convince an entire populace that being angry and motivated to see change, you know, self-awareness first, then social awareness, then social impact. If you've got a lot of motivated people with a passion, you're potentially going to see change in areas where authority doesn't really want or need to see change. So by removing certain key motivational facts, one of them potentially being anger, you have a much more kind of mollified and malleable group of people than if, for instance, taking your own country, the States back in the 60s, where universities were hotbeds of social change and social justice. If you haven't got angry people meeting with a common purpose, you probably haven't got social change engines.
I see a whole opportunity here in how we help our youth, you know, the next generation of the world here, get comfortable with being angry, and a whole lot of learning opportunities here, right? Because how many parents are out there, included, when your kids are younger, or even any age, you don't want to see your kid uncomfortable, right? So they come home, but younger, upset, sad, disappointed that their friend ignored them on the playground or something, right? So they come home. How many parents say, oh, don't feel bad. Oh, well, he's not a good friend then anyway. You don't need him. Don't feel bad. Do this or that. The shift would be, wow, I understand why you would feel angry. And I can, you know, must be hard, and allow them to feel that. And then the learning is, but just because you're angry doesn't mean tomorrow it's okay to punch that friend in the throat, you know, because you're mad at them. It's also not okay to curse them out. But there is a proper way to express your emotions and speak your needs to your friend to process that anger. There's a whole opportunity here to educate the youth in the positivity in anger. It's a roadmap to leading us to know what our needs are. Because Gabby said earlier, anger is just a need not being met. So if we can educate our kids in learning how to identify what their needs are, what could that do for the rest of their life, and being able to notice that? They won't get into crappy relationships. They won't get into crappy jobs where their boss shits all over them, right? It'll change. It could change the whole trajectory of their life if they got comfortable with anger.
You actually almost took the words out of my mouth, because that's what I was thinking before you even started explaining it. And this is really important, because we do not teach our children, and we were not taught ourselves, how to actually proper deal with anger without having negative consequences. So we have adults then who just hit the wife because they never ever learned how to deal with anger, and they just put it into physical action, right? We have kids at 15 which needs were never met, who never could express themselves, who never learned how to deal with it, and they're acting out left, right, and center, and then they get diagnosed with defiance disorder, right? They were never allowed to express what was really going on. They didn't learn how to do it. They only learned it's bad, don't do it, and they're acting out more. So people only address the bad behavior. They never actually really sit down with them and say, well, what's actually really going on here?
Anger is my default pattern. And I'm not, look, I'm not shy about saying it. If that is my immediate first reaction. It's a reactive default pattern that I get angry. I've learned enough and I'm in touch enough to allow it to be there, and to then, once I'm done doing my own little rant, where even if it's by myself, to say, well, what's really going on here, so that I can address it. But that's been half a century of learning to get me there. What could my life have been like prior to that, you know?
Exactly. So we fail our following generations if we don't bring all of this wise-mindedness of which we're talking, hopefully, in these conversations to younger generations. Yes, it's great that we perhaps spread it again through the generations that are our peers, and hopefully that will trickle down. But let's be wise and maybe even skip a generation and go for the youngest and help them learning how to make use of powerful emotions. We need to have enough light in us that our shadows don't consume us, but enough shadow that we're actually strong enough to hold our light and presence and teach and show other people how to do that. And I think we're probably at a point we will wrap things up. So, Brett, what are your final thoughts and takeaways on ranting to raving?
I think it's an opportunity for us to share tools with, most importantly, the youth, right? Because that's where it's going to be able to play out the longest run of making the biggest impact, right? And I've seen too many adults, and I'll say myself, that have not learned how to deal with the anger, right? Because I've experienced that in my past and still do to this day. But it's like I didn't have the opportunity of growing up. So even as an adult, there's still an opportunity to grow up or to view anger in the positive way and understand that it really has to do with whatever feelings that you have for yourself and how you can shift that so that you're just not going further down that same road and putting that onto somebody else. And then, you know what I mean? It's just, you don't want to keep that energy going in a negative direction. So there's just a lot of tools to be shared, and look forward to sharing and receiving some of those as well.
Thanks, Brett. Melanie.
Sorry, I think the word that's coming up for me is balance. And it's learning to, balance those emotions, and also, not being afraid to show those emotions, but then explaining, I think, a little bit, especially when we're dealing with children. Maybe I'm having a bad day and I'm really sad, or I'm really angry, and feeling okay to show that, but afterwards having that discussion, and say and explain, I was really angry because of this, and this is what I've done about it. Yeah, so it's how I've channeled that energy, how I've used that anger to actually change something, to get a result that I wanted. So I think, again, that brings us back to the kind of communication aspect of it. We could be angry, we can be sad, we can be happy, but people around us, I think they need sometimes that communication, that explanation as to why we're acting the way we are, why we're saying the things we are, so that they can have that context and get a deeper understanding, and then they can kind of model that behavior themselves.
Perfect. And how often do we see people go into a social situation and, they're ramped up to the eyeballs, and their immediate default is verbal aggression because they think they are going to get their own way. And it's all that they've ever learned. It was how they were parented. It's how they've seen things get results during their formative years. And therefore they go into even conversations with perceived authority with this approach. Gabby, closing thoughts for you.
I'm all about communication. So what's going to my head right now is creating a workshop on how to manage anger and how to use our communication to actually deal with it. So my brain is on overdrive. I'm going to think about it, and because it's so important. It's so important to manage to do that and learn how to deal with it. And as Erika said, acknowledge it, but then learn the right ways to deal with it rather than the ways we do deal with it culturally, which I think mainly comes from the point because we are told it's all wrong. So you suppress it and you find other ways to deal with it. But most of the time it's either not a good way or we talked about trap in the last podcast. It's another trap.
For sure. And do you know what? While you were speaking, I was thinking back to episode 4 of our conversations. And for those that have been following along, you'll recognize in what Gabby just said, the difference between a doer and a talker. She's come after a 20-minute or so conversation, and she's going away with a whole host of ideas for a communication workshop. So I just would like to highlight that to you, our dear listeners. And Julien, your final thoughts and closing up this episode, please.
Yeah, for me, this final thought is that we have to be really aware that anger, it's if we don't process it the right way, we're just gonna internalize it, somatize it. It's not healthy to keep it for ourselves. So I think it's important, like, to express it, so we don't like crystallize it in our body, kind of. But yeah, as you just say, like, if we just keep on complaining, it's just complaining. It's not doing anything. So as Melanie said, it's a balance. I think it's really key to understand that, and it's also important to understand ourselves, to be able to put words in our anger, so we can resolve the problem, but we can also get the opportunity to know ourselves a little bit better, to know like what we need in our life and how to express it to get better communication about it, like Gabby said. So yeah.
Very interesting point you make there about somatizing, so bringing an energy into our bodies. And anger turned inwards is depression. So by not learning how to cope and deal with anger, we are also potentially just building an entire generation of chronic depressives. So, Erika, I know that you wanted to add something. Go ahead.
Just real quick, to Gabby, I was writing stuff down too, because I'm like, this is like a workshop wanting to happen. So we should talk, because I come from the angle of demystifying anger, right? Like, let's take the spin and then how do we deal with it? Whatever. But what I wanted to say to end was, when I think of anger, I kind of personalize anger, right? Like, if anger was a person, I suspect he or she would feel really left out and really unwanted in conversations. So why don't we just start welcoming anger and letting them feel invited and wanted, so that it's more willing to show up, to allow us to become friends with it, so that it can serve us, because all our emotions are there to serve us in some way. It depends on how we want to look at them and what we want to do with them.
For sure. It becomes that annoying wannabe friend that's constantly tapping on the window. And, maybe if we were to ask it what it wanted to say, it would actually give us some guidance and some good ideas.
Yeah, otherwise it's just going to stalk us, and then nothing good happens when we're stalked. So we might as well become friends with it.
Yeah, stalking normally ends badly. There's a subject for another conversation. Thank you, dear listeners, for listening to episode 6 of the Wise-Mind Fireside Chats, which was ranting to raving. Contact details for all those in the conversation will, as always, be in the channel, somewhere to be found. And we look forward to having you join us for another conversation soon.